People have been let off the leash, Thomas Mayo says quietly, swiping through screenshots. Racist memes depicting First Nations Australians as grifters, wife-beaters and primitives flash across his phone. Then, personal threats appear accusing him of providing cover for evil. Mr. Mayo is one of the public faces of the Yes campaign in Australia's historic Voice to Parliament referendum, to be held on October 14. If successful, the vote will change the nation's constitution for the first time in 46 years, creating a body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to advise the government on policies affecting their communities. Opinion polls had long shown support for the change but now suggest the no vote is leading. Though some argue the shift reflects public sentiment, Yes campaigners blame it on an ecosystem of disinformation which they say is being led by figures in the no camp and amplified by suspicious accounts on social media. Independent experts say the most pernicious and pervasive falsehoods spreading like wildfire online concern race. Amid all the noise, concerns are growing over the mental health of First Nations communities, who find themselves at the center of an increasingly divisive debate. And questions are again being raised over whether Australia is ready to grapple with the open wounds at the heart of its nationhood. Some of the most difficult chapters include massacres and violence against First Nations people and the theft of their land and livelihoods. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians weren't counted in the nation's census until 1971, and for most of last century many of their children were forcibly removed by the government under assimilation policies. At the heart of the Voice is a debate that has long persisted in Australia over how to close the gap on the glaring disparities that First Nations people still experience. These include vastly poorer health, wealth, and education outcomes. The suicide rate among Indigenous Australians, for example, is almost double that of non-Indigenous Australians. And despite representing less than 4% of Australia's population, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people account for 32% of prisoners. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has framed the Voice as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for real, overdue, and much-needed change. Supporters say it will lead to greater self-determination for First Nations communities. The No campaign says the Voice will have too much power though, arguing it will undermine government processes and clog up the courts with its objections. But the Voice will have no power of veto, and many fears raised by the No campaign have been debunked or strongly disputed, including by Australia's Solicitor General. Disinformation ecosystem. The debate online has been dominated by discussions of race, say fact-checkers and monitors. Race is a prime vector for abuse, trolling, disinformation and conspiracy theorizing, and on the no side of the debate, Twitter X is rife with that, says Dr. Timothy Graham, a digital media lecturer who has analyzed over 250,000 voice-related posts. The Australian Associated Press fact-check team, which has been hired to monitor content on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, has noticed the same on those platforms. The official campaign has only just begun, but they are already seeing volumes of misinformation and disinformation that outstrips what they saw at Australia's 2022 election, says editor Ben James. The team has debunked posts on everything from the rules of a referendum to false claims about the Constitution, key campaign figures, and the possibility of a future black state. Among them have been lies that Mr. Mayo told another Indigenous man to sit down and shut up for asking questions at a Yes campaign event, manipulated videos of the Prime Minister, rants insisting that non-Indigenous people will be banned from the country's biggest sporting venues, and claims that the Voice had already failed at a referendum over 20 years ago. We have checked claims from both sides, but we have certainly seen more claims from those against the proposal, says Mr. James. He tells the BBC a fair proportion of those claims contain racist undertones or abusive and derogatory language. Mr. James stresses that not all the anti-Voice claims are coming from the official No campaign, and that the most offensive content is generally not emanating from representatives of either camp. But analysts say a lot of the content mirrors the narratives that underpin the No campaign. That includes claims from Australia's opposition leader Peter Dutton that the Voice will permanently divide the nation based on race, creating an Orwellian effect that gives First Nations communities greater rights and privileges. These warnings are unfounded, say legal and constitutional experts. Mr. Dutton has not directly addressed accusations he has spread misinformation, but said in a speech to Parliament, "When Australians raise reasonable and legitimate concerns about the voice model, the government dismisses them as a scare campaign, as nonsense, as noise, and misinformation." However, some online accounts responsible for spreading messaging around racial division show signs of inauthenticity and bot-like behavior, according to social media experts working with the Yes campaign. Those accounts were recently created, have almost no history, and have been duplicating the exact same content, says communications advisor Ed Coper. One example he cites is an anti-voice Facebook post which was shared over 53,000 times shortly after being created, while only tallying 92 likes and 23 comments. He argues this is evidence of an attempt to game the platform's algorithm and spread disinformation as far and wide as possible. In July, Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, announced a funding boost for its fact-checking teams tasked with monitoring the referendum. Last week, however, it suspended one partner organization to review the group's certification and complaints against it. "We've also improved our AI so that we can more effectively detect and block fake accounts, which are often behind this activity," said Meta's Director of Public Policy for Australia, Mia Garlick. For Mr. Mayo, there is a growing disconnect between the narratives permeating social media and what he experiences in public. "You deal with all this vitriol online, and for me even in the mainstream media, but among fellow Australians, the feeling is totally different. I can feel a great momentum towards success," the Karaweg Aboriginal and Kalkalgal, Arabamal Torres Strait Islander man tells the BBC. Community harm. Mental health agencies say they are recording marked increases in reports of online hate speech and abuse. "We've had a 106% rise in the last 4 months on abuse calls, which I'd put down to the voice basically," says Marjorie Anderson, the national manager at 13 Yarn, a crisis support line for First Nations Australians. She describes the racist abuse on social media as scary. "We won't know the scale of the damage until after the referendum. Think about the responsibility if the Aboriginal suicide rate goes up, and we can link that back to disinformation around the voice," she says. But Fair Australia, the conservative organisation spearheading the No vote, stands behind its claims. The government and the Yes campaigns wear the entire responsibility for this divisive referendum. "We are not the ones trying to divide Australians by race," its leader, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, tells the BBC. Megan Crocker, a Menong woman who helps run the National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project, says her team has also seen a serious spike in reports of racism and comments of hate. Ms. Crocker had initially argued against the voice, believing it did not go far enough because the advisory body will have no veto power over MPs. But she recently changed her position following a spate of suicides in her local community in Western Australia. Her hope now is that the body, though not perfect, she says, will shift the dial on the stark issues killing and hurting First Nations people. Publicly, Yes campaigners are still projecting confidence despite the recent drop in polling. But Mr. Mayo worries about the scars the debate itself may inflict, win or lose. "People are going to suffer throughout this campaign. I think the most shameful thing is what the opposition has done to this conversation, and history will reflect that," he says. "This takes nothing away from anybody other than the burdens of our colonial past. It is hopeful and unifying, and they've made it a divisive political issue when it's really a basic, modest reform."
Head there. Head there. Head there.
That's an easy call. That's an easy call. I'm the best killer around.
Kill.
Head there. Help me!
Double kill!
Help me!
Resources here.
Help me!
Triple kill!
से मार रहा है भाई हमें रिवाइव करो बस पिंक
Head there. Head there. Good job. Good job.
No play con el caramba.
तो भाई रुको ना लाइक
Head there. Head there.
Killing spree! Killing spree! Help me! Help me! Killing spree! Killing spree! Good job! Killing spree! Help me!
Thanks.
Help me! Killing spree!
People have been let off the leash, Thomas Mayo says quietly, swiping through screenshots. Racist memes depicting First Nations Australians as grifters, wife beaters, and primitives flash across his phone. Then, personal threats appear accusing him of providing cover for evil. Mr. Mayo is one of the public faces of the Yes campaign in Australia's historic Voice to Parliament referendum, to be held on October 14. If successful, the vote will change the nation's constitution for the first time in 46 years, creating a body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to advise the government on policies affecting their communities. Opinion polls had long shown support for the change but now suggest the no vote is leading. Though some argue the shift reflects public sentiment, yes campaigners blame it on an ecosystem of disinformation which they say is being led by figures in the no camp and amplified by suspicious accounts on social media. Independent experts say the most pernicious and pervasive falsehoods spreading like wildfire online concern race. Amid all the noise, concerns are growing over the mental health of First Nations communities, who find themselves at the center of an increasingly divisive debate. And questions are again being raised over whether Australia is ready to grapple with the open wounds at the heart of its nationhood. Some of the most difficult chapters include massacres and violence against First Nations people and the theft of their land and livelihoods. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians weren't counted in the nation's census until 1971, and for most of last century many of their children were forcibly removed by the government under assimilation policies. At the heart of the voice is a debate that has long persisted in Australia over how to close the gap on the glaring disparities that First Nations people still experience. These include vastly poorer health, wealth, and education outcomes. The suicide rate among Indigenous Australians, for example, is almost double that of non-Indigenous Australians. And despite representing less than 4% of Australia's population, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people account for 32% of prisoners. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has framed the voice as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for real, overdue, and much-needed change. Supporters say it will lead to greater self-determination for First Nations communities. The No campaign says the voice will have too much power though, arguing it will undermine government processes and clog up the courts with its objections. But the voice will have no power of veto, and many fears raised by the No campaign have been debunked or strongly disputed, including by Australia's Solicitor General. Disinformation ecosystem. The debate online has been dominated by discussions of race, say fact-checkers and monitors. Race is a prime vector for abuse, trolling, disinformation and conspiracy theorizing, and on the no side of the debate, Twitter X is rife with that, says Dr. Timothy Graham, a digital media lecturer who has analyzed over 250,000 voice-related posts. The Australian Associated Press fact-check team, which has been hired to monitor content on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, has noticed the same on those platforms. The official campaign has only just begun, but they are already seeing volumes of misinformation and disinformation that outstrips what they saw at Australia's 2022 election, says editor Ben James. The team has debunked posts on everything from the rules of a referendum to false claims about the Constitution, key campaign figures, and the possibility of a future black state. Among them have been lies that Mr. Mayo told another Indigenous man to sit down and shut up for asking questions at a Yes campaign event, manipulated videos of the Prime Minister, rants insisting that non-Indigenous people will be banned from the country's biggest sporting venues, and claims that the voice had already failed at a referendum over 20 years ago. We have checked claims from both sides, but we have certainly seen more claims from those against the proposal, says Mr. James. He tells the BBC a fair proportion of those claims contain racist undertones or abusive and derogatory language. Mr. James stresses that not all the anti-voice claims are coming from the official No campaign, and that the most offensive content is generally not emanating from representatives of either camp. But analysts say a lot of the content mirrors the narratives that underpin the No campaign. That includes claims from Australia's opposition leader Peter Dutton that the voice will permanently divide the nation based on race, creating an Orwellian effect that gives First Nations communities greater rights and privileges. These warnings are unfounded, say legal and constitutional experts. Mr. Dutton has not directly addressed accusations he has spread misinformation, but said in a speech to Parliament, when Australians raise reasonable and legitimate concerns about the voice model, the government dismisses them as a scare campaign, as nonsense, as noise, and misinformation. However, some online accounts responsible for spreading messaging around racial division show signs of inauthenticity and bot-like behavior, according to social media experts working with the Yes campaign. Those accounts were recently created, have almost no history, and have been duplicating the exact same content, says communications advisor Ed Koper. One example he cites is an anti-voice Facebook post which was shared over 53,000 times shortly after being created, while only tallying 92 likes and 23 comments. He argues this is evidence of an attempt to game the platform's algorithm and spread disinformation as far and wide as possible. In July, Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, announced a funding boost for its fact-checking teams tasked with monitoring the referendum. Last week, however, it suspended one partner organization to review the group's certification and complaints against it. We've also improved our AI so that we can more effectively detect and block fake accounts, which are often behind this activity, said Meta's Director of Public Policy for Australia Mia Garlick. For Mr. Mayo, there is a growing disconnect between the narratives permeating social media and what he experiences in public. You deal with all this vitriol online, and for me even in the mainstream media, but among fellow Australians, the feeling is totally different. I can feel a great momentum towards success, the Karaweg Aboriginal and Kalkalgal, Arabamal Torres Strait Islander man tells the BBC. Community harm. Mental health agencies say they are recording marked increases in reports of online hate speech and abuse. We've had a 106% rise in the last 4 months on abuse calls, which I'd put down to the voice basically, says Marjorie Anderson, the national manager at 13 Yarn, a crisis support line for First Nations Australians. She describes the racist abuse on social media as scary. We won't know the scale of the damage until after the referendum. Think about the responsibility if the Aboriginal suicide rate goes up, and we can link that back to disinformation around the voice, she says. But Fair Australia, the conservative organisation spearheading the no vote, stands behind its claims. The government and the Yes campaigns wear the entire responsibility for this divisive referendum. We are not the ones trying to divide Australians by race, its leader, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, tells the BBC. Megan Crocker, a Menong woman who helps run the National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project, says her team has also seen a serious spike in reports of racism and comments of hate. Ms. Crocker had initially argued against the voice, believing it did not go far enough because the advisory body will have no veto power over MPs. But she recently changed her position following a spate of suicides in her local community in Western Australia. Her hope now is that the body, though not perfect, she says, will shift the dial on the stark issues killing and hurting First Nations people. Publicly, Yes campaigners are still projecting confidence despite the recent drop in polling. But Mr. Mayo worries about the scars the debate itself may inflict, win or lose. People are going to suffer throughout this campaign. I think the most shameful thing is what the opposition has done to this conversation, and history will reflect that, he says. This takes nothing away from anybody other than the burdens of our colonial past. It is hopeful and unifying, and they've made it a divisive political issue when it's really a basic, modest reform. A dangerous killer who escaped a Pennsylvania prison climbed the same walls another inmate scaled earlier this year to get away, officials say. Danilo Cavalcante, 34, whose escape last week has made headlines in his native Brazil, remains at large. Newly released prison footage shows the inmate crab walked up 2 walls separated by a 5 feet (1.5 meters) hallway. Officials say razor wire was installed after the previous escape, but that it was clearly not effective. The Chester County Prison acting warden said at a news conference that the prison had hired security consultants after the May 19 escape of Igor Bolt, who told police that he had relied on his knowledge of rock climbing to escape. The consultants had identified an insufficiency, said acting warden Howard Holland, and razor wire was installed to keep other inmates from using the same exit route. While we believed our security methods were sufficient, they were proven otherwise. And we will now move quickly to enhance our security measures, said Mr. Holland. UK terror suspect escapes prison by hiding under van. Manhunt for US murder suspect after jailbreak. Cavalcante was sentenced to life in prison last month after being found guilty of brutally stabbing ex-girlfriend Deborah Brandeo to death in April 2021 in front of her 2 small children. Video shows how he'd crab walked up a wall, through razor wire, Mr. Holland said on Wednesday, placing his hands on one wall and his feet on another wall to push his way upwards. After reaching the roof, both inmates were able to climb down a ladder to a less secure part of the prison. Asked how it could be possible for an escape to be replicated so soon after the previous one, Mr. Holland replied, "We thought we took appropriate efforts to prevent that with the razor wire." But while the prison focused on the physical barriers, the acting warden said they had failed to address the human element. At the time of the escape, just before 9 o'clock local time, 13 o'clock GMT, there was a corrections officer in the observation tower. But the officer apparently failed to monitor the security feed, unlike in the May case when the inmate was caught only 5 minutes after escaping once he was spotted on video monitors. The officer who was assigned to oversee Yard C when Cavalcante got away has been placed on administrative leave and is under investigation by the state's attorney general. The action of the observation tower officer during the escape is a key part of the investigation, said Mr. Holland. Investigators leading the manhunt said on Wednesday that they have expanded their search perimeter amid several sightings in recent days. Pennsylvania State Police Lieutenant Col. George Bivens told reporters that Cavalcante may be having trouble navigating through heavily wooded terrain and could be hiding in sheds or other outbuildings. On Monday, authorities began using helicopters and patrol cars to blast an audio message recorded by Cavalcante's mother in Brazil, in which she calls on him to surrender. A $20,000 (£16,000) reward is being offered for information leading to his capture. A review of veterinary services in the UK has been launched over concerns that pet owners could be paying too much. The Competition and Markets Authority (CMA) said vet fees were rising faster than other goods and services during the cost of living crisis. Pet owners can face eye-watering bills, said Consumer Group, which shared its findings with the CMA. The British Veterinary Association said it had not seen evidence that changes in the sector were pushing up prices. The vet industry is worth £2 billion after pet ownership rose to two-thirds of UK households during the COVID pandemic. When pets need urgent treatment, owners may not have all the information to decide on the best deal, the CMA said. Its chief executive, Sarah Cardell, said, "Caring for an ill pet can create real financial pressure, particularly alongside other cost of living concerns. When a pet is unwell, they often need urgent treatment, which means that pet owners may not shop around for the best deal, like they do with other services." Sue Davies, the head of consumer protection policy at Which, said, "Consumers have no choice but to turn to vets when their beloved pet is sick or injured, often footing eye-watering bills in the process." She added that areas of concern included pet owners not knowing the price of treatments until after their appointment, and difficulty shopping around for cheaper medication. Cost-saving tips for pet owners. The coronavirus pandemic saw more people working from home, and now about 60% of households have a pet, the CMA said. But now many owners are struggling with squeezed household budgets as price rises reach near record highs, meaning more needs to be done to make sure vet costs are fair, it said. George Lusty from the CMA told the BBC's Today program that the costs of specific treatments, such as booster jabs, were rising rapidly. "We're seeing that most people are paying about £45 for an individual booster jab. But there's many other services and costs that people cannot have predicted, and they can find themselves unexpectedly facing some really high bills. When other household bills are going up very steeply at the moment, we want to do everything we can to make sure that people can predict how much it's going to cost to see a vet, both the routine stuff, but also if there's a crisis." The CMA was also concerned about changes in ownership of vet practices in recent years. Independent practices accounted for 89% of the UK veterinary industry in 2013, but that had fallen to about 45% by 2021, said the CMA. In some cases, a single company may own hundreds of practices, and it may be unclear to people whether their vet is part of a large group, the CMA said. This could impact pet owners' choices and reduce the incentives of local vet practices to compete. The British Veterinary Association, which represents more than 19,000 vets, said it supported healthy competition. The veterinary sector has undergone significant changes in recent years, with the growth of large veterinary corporates operating alongside independent vet practices, said BVA President Malcolm Morley. Sadly, soaring inflation and the cost of living crisis is impacting both pet owners and business, including vet practices. However, we've not seen any hard data or real evidence to suggest that corporatization is driving up prices or negatively impacting quality of care. Last week, the Celia Hammond Animal Trust said a shortage of vets due to Brexit means people are struggling to get their animals neutered. Ms. Cardell said, "There has been a lot of consolidation in the vet industry in recent years, so now is the right time to take a look at how the market is working." The CMA would like to hear from pet owners, veterinary surgeons, veterinary nurses, practice managers, and veterinary businesses as part of the review. It said it will provide a further update and its next steps in early 2024. The CMA's review follows its annual plan, which sets out that the regulator will act in areas of essential spending and where people are under particular financial pressure, such as accommodation and caring for ourselves and others. Alex Steele is 82 and has been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but he is determined to carry on playing cricket, even with an oxygen tank strapped to his back. Alec has idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a disease that destroys lung function and comes with a life expectancy of between 1 and 5 years. But 3 years after his diagnosis, the former Scotland international is back keeping wicket in Dundee. "You must have a positive attitude," he says. "I said to myself, although I've been told it's a terminal illness, I am going to do my level best to get myself back into playing cricket. I think the most important thing that came over me was to never, ever, give up." Alex says he found the first 6 months following his diagnosis extremely difficult, both on his body and spirit. With his lung function as low as 30%, moving around and getting upstairs was a struggle. But while attending the palliative care unit at Royal Victoria Hospital in Dundee, he informed staff that he wanted to get in shape to play one last game. Following months of hard work and recovery and rehabilitation, Alec achieved his dream in a match at St Andrews last year. He says, "I had the great privilege of walking over the boundary rope to go onto the cricket pitch. And honestly, I think it is the most wonderful experience I think I've had for a long time. The thing that game taught me was that I could catch a ball and I could do a little bit of wicket keeping." Since that first game, Alec has not looked back. The 82-year-old is now finishing up his second season playing with the aid of his oxygen tank, and he is determined he'll be at the stump next spring too. "If I survive, wild horses won't keep me away," he says. Perhaps it is no surprise that Alec has surpassed all expectations on his recovery and return to the sport. This is a man who played league cricket until he was 64 for Forfarshire Cricket Club. In his international career, he batted at famous grounds like Lord's and the Oval, passing up the chance to play the county game in England to concentrate on his other career as an architect. And he tells a story of stumping out cricket great Viv Richards only for the umpire to look the other way. But while cricket has been a huge part of his life, Alec now wants to use his story to raise awareness of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. He says he had never heard of the illness before his diagnosis, calling it a horrible disease. It has left him needing oxygen between 16 and 24 hours a day, and it can take him days to recover from matches. Despite this, Alec doesn't like to focus on the downsides. If a negative thought enters his mind, he pushes it away. In his first match at St Andrews, he managed 10 overs of cricket. In his most recent match on Sunday, he managed 40. "When you come off the pitch, you've won the battle," he says. Palestinians set out terms for agreeing to a historic Saudi-Israeli deal. A cash boost of hundreds of millions of dollars and more control of land in the occupied West Bank are among Palestinian demands in the event of a three-way deal involving the US, Saudi Arabia and Israel, the BBC has learned. Officials from the Palestinian Authority, PA, held talks in Riyadh with Saudi counterparts on Wednesday. They were also due to see US officials. The Americans are long thought to have been pushing for a landmark pact to normalize Israel-Saudi ties. It would be underwritten by Washington and would include a major security deal the Saudis want to achieve with the US. But the prospects for such agreements face significant obstacles and remain distant. "We don't expect any imminent announcements or breakthroughs in the period ahead," said White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Tuesday. However, given the scope for a historic realignment of ties in the Middle East, there is continuing speculation over the framework for any deal, with American shuttle diplomacy picking up again after trips by officials to Riyadh, Amman, and Jerusalem this summer. U.S. President Joe Biden is likely to see a Saudi-Israel deal as a breakthrough foreign policy prize he can present to voters ahead of next year's election. Saudi Arabia is a leader of the Arab and Islamic world. It has never formally recognized Israel since the creation of the state in 1948. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talked up the possibility last month, claiming, "We're about to witness a pivot of history." Any deal, though, would be deeply controversial. In return for recognizing Israel, Saudi Arabia is said to be demanding U.S. guarantees for advanced American-made weapons and, most contentious of all, a civil nuclear program including in-country uranium enrichment. Israel, for its part, would benefit from trade and defense ties with the Gulf superpower and further historic integration it has always sought in the region, following on from other Arab state normalization deals brokered in 2020. These are mostly security and trade agreements. Fast forward to the year 2023, and we now see that Saudi Arabia also wants to get involved in this, said Diana Buttu, a former legal advisor to the official Palestinian negotiating team in the now moribund peace talks with the Israelis. For a deal to succeed, it would have to be seen to involve significant Israeli concessions to the Palestinians. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the kingdom's de facto ruler, needs to assuage his own public, historically opposed to Israel and deeply sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Meanwhile, President Biden will also need to prove he has won significant gains for the Palestinians to get support from his Democratic Party. Many in the party reject the idea of any defense sweeteners for the Saudis due to the country's human rights record and its role in the war in Yemen. They are also hostile to the idea of rewarding Israel's current extreme nationalist governing coalition, which they see as exacerbating tensions in the West Bank and which has sparked unprecedented instability within Israel itself. The team of top Palestinian officials in Riyadh, including the two men seen as closest to President Mahmoud Abbas, the PA's intelligence chief, Majid Faraj, and Hussein al-Sheikh, Secretary General of the Palestine Liberation Organization, met Saudi National Security Advisor Musaad al-Ibn on Wednesday, according to a senior Palestinian official familiar with the discussions. Their list of demands in return for engaging with the American-backed process was set out during a meeting with U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Barbara Leaf last week in Amman. The Palestinian official told the BBC the demands include transferring parts of the West Bank currently under full Israeli control, known as Area C under the 1990s Oslo Peace Accords, to the governance of the Palestinian Authority. A complete cessation of Israeli settlement growth in the West Bank. Resuming Saudi financial support to the PA, which slowed from 2016 and stopped completely 3 years ago, to the tune of around $200 million, £160 million per year. Reopening the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, the diplomatic mission to the Palestinians that was shut down by President Donald Trump. Resuming U.S.-brokered negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians from where they stopped under then-Secretary of State John Kerry in 2014. Such concessions are very significant, reportedly already seen by the Americans as overreaching by the Palestinians. But they are a far cry from the official, publicly stated Palestinian position on Saudi-Israel normalization, which is to reject it outright if it does not leave them with an independent state. This follows the Arab Peace Initiative, a Saudi-led plan of 2002, which offered the Arab world's recognition of Israel in return for Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territories and a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, with its capital in East Jerusalem. The current approach reflects the deep bind the Palestinian leadership is in, according to Ms. Buttu. Palestinians by and large don't want to be part of any of these normalization deals because the Arab world's support is the only tool that we have left, she said. We've been told that we're not allowed to violently resist. We're told that we're not allowed to pursue legal measures to demand an end to the occupation. We're told that we're not allowed to pursue boycotts, divestment, and sanction. The Palestinian Authority is now questioning, Should we instead be trying to get our demands heard and realized, or should we do what we did in 2020, which was to ignore it? And again, it's a bind. No matter what the Palestinian Authority does on this, it is doomed to fail, Ms. Buttu told the World News.
Demarai Gray leaves Everton to join Al Ettifaq. Demarai Gray has left Everton to join Saudi Pro League side Al Ettifaq. The fee has not been disclosed, but reports suggest the 27-year-old Jamaica winger has moved for £8 million on a 4-year deal. Gray was rebuked by Everton boss Sean Dyche after seeming to criticize his manager on social media after a switch to Fulham failed to go through. Gray wrote in an Instagram post on Thursday, "The truth is I gave my all to this club on and off the pitch." He added, "There has been a lot of speculation about my situation all summer. I was ready to play as much football as possible this season, but it felt like this was not going to happen." Dyche responded to Gray by saying that no moves are sanctioned without the club having the final say. He also said that Gray didn't want to train and didn't want to be here when an initial move failed to transpire. Gray had said that it's so difficult to play for someone who don't show you respect as a person. Gray did not play for Everton this season and had also been linked with a move to Turkish side Besiktas before completing the switch to Saudi Arabia, where the transfer window closes on Thursday. He scored 9 goals in 67 Premier League appearances after arriving at Goodison in 2021. Al Ettifaq are managed by former Liverpool captain Steven Gerrard and have so far signed England midfielder Jordan Henderson, former Liverpool midfielder Jorginho Wijnaldum, Scotland defender Jack Hendry and ex-Lion striker Moussa Dembele. Latest Everton news, analysis and fan views. Get Blues news notifications. Subscribe for more. 2024 Euro, how qualifying stands for finals in Germany. The first international break of the 2023-24 season brings with it the resumption of qualifying for next summer's European Championships. Over 6 days, the continent's nations will be in action trying to strengthen their claim for a place in the finals in Germany. This includes the home nations, with England and Scotland already in a very strong position in their groups. However, some major countries have plenty of work to do to qualify. BBC Sport gives you the lowdown on how qualifying is shaping up and the fixtures to look out for in the coming days. Upcoming 2024 European Championship qualifying fixtures. Scotland and England lead home nations charge. Scotland are in magnificent shape in Group A, sitting way out in front of the rest with 4 wins out of 4 and a very healthy total of 12 points. They have a big opportunity to add to that on Friday night when they travel to Cyprus, who are bottom of the group without a point from 3 games. Steve Clarke's team have beaten them once already, winning 3-0 at Hampden Park in March. Scotland will be mindful of the sides below them, Spain in particular, who have games in hand and the capacity to build some momentum with a couple of wins within a week. The Scots have just won qualifier during this break, with their second match being the 150th anniversary game at Hampden Park against old rivals England. Grealish and Alexander-Arnold out of England's squad. Before that, Gareth Southgate's team travelled to Poland to face Ukraine on Saturday for their sole qualifier of the break. The 3 Lions also topped their group with a perfect record after 4 matches. A victory over the side that is second in the table this weekend will further strengthen their hand. Northern Ireland are struggling. Just 3 points so far from 4 Group H games means a 6-point gap between themselves and the top 2 Finland and Kazakhstan. Ballard is latest injury concern before qualifiers. Victories in their 2 fixtures in this break feel essential, with a trip to Slovenia a place above them in 4th on 7 points on Thursday, followed by a home game with second-placed Kazakhstan. The Republic of Ireland have just 1 win from their 3 games so far, but remain in contention in a very tough Group B as they sit 3rd, 3 points behind second-placed Greece. Ferguson to miss qualifiers against France and Netherlands. Their 2 games this break will define their challenge, with an away fixture at group leaders and 2022 World Cup runners-up France on Thursday, followed by a home game with another big hitter, the Netherlands, on Sunday. Holders have work to do, but France are flying. Having missed out on the World Cup in 2022, Italy are in another battle to qualify for the finals of a major tournament. They are third in the group, led by England, who beat them in the first of the two games the reigning European champions have played so far. With a new manager in Luciano Spalletti, they get the chance for some revenge against the nation that denied them a spot in Qatar when they face North Macedonia on Saturday. Then comes a big home game against second-placed Ukraine the following Tuesday. Belgium are in decent shape in Group F. They are second, 3 points behind Austria, but with a game in hand and matches to come against the two sides who have just 1 point. They are in Azerbaijan on Saturday, then host Estonia 3 days later. Portugal have even fewer worries. They have won all 4 of their games to date, scoring 14 and conceding none on their way to topping Group J. They now have 2 key matches against second-placed Slovakia, who are just 2 points behind, before hosting third-placed Luxembourg. Croatia are third in Wales Group, but have only played 2 games. This break is a real chance for them to make a move on the top 2, with matches against struggling Latvia and second-placed Armenia to come. As already touched on, Spain are lagging behind in Group A, but they do have games in hand. They will be desperate to make amends for their loss to Scotland in their last qualifier when they travel to Georgia before hosting Cyprus. France and the Netherlands were expected to dominate Group B, and while the former are fulfilling their side of the bargain with 4 wins from 4 to top the table, the latter have work to do. A win and a loss from their 2 games makes it important they take a significant tally from a home game against Greece on Thursday and Saturday's trip to Ireland. All to play for in Groups E, G, and I. Switzerland have set the pace in Group I, having taken 10 points from their 4 games. Romania and Israel are their nearest challengers on 8 and 7 points respectively, and meet in Bucharest on Saturday, the same day the Swiss are in Kosovo. Switzerland then have a great opportunity to further strengthen their qualification status when they host bottom nation Andorra on Tuesday. Hungary and Serbia look the standout sides in Group G, with both on 7 points from 3 games, but the former top with a slightly better goal difference. They meet each other on Thursday in Belgrade, giving third-place Montenegro, who are in Lithuania, a chance to make up ground. With Hungary only playing once, the other teams can apply some pressure in their second fixtures on Sunday. Ballon d'Or shortlist: England trio and 7 from Manchester City nominated. England's Jude Bellingham, Bukayo Saka, and Harry Kane and 7 Manchester City players are on the 30-man shortlist for the 2023 Ballon d'Or. City's Erling Haaland is one of 12 Premier League players nominated. Argentina legend Lionel Messi is the overwhelming favorite to win and extend his record to 8 Ballons d'Or after winning the World Cup. Midfielder Bellingham and striker Kane both moved clubs this summer to Real Madrid and Bayern Munich respectively. Lionesses' quartet among women's Ballon d'Or nominees. Treble-winning Manchester City are represented by record-breaking goalscorer Haaland, Kevin De Bruyne, Ruben Dias, World Cup winner Julian Alvarez, Bernardo Silva, Rodri, and Josko Gvardiol. Croatia defender Gvardiol was not at City last season, but Ilkay Gundogan, now at Barcelona, was, and he also makes the shortlist. The other Premier League nominees are Arsenal's Saka and Martin Odegaard, Liverpool forward Mohamed Salah, Manchester United keeper Andre Onana, and Aston Villa goalkeeper Emiliano Martinez. There are 2 players who left European clubs this summer: Messi, who joined Inter Miami from Paris Saint-Germain, and current holder Karim Benzema, who left Real Madrid for Al Ittihad. 5-time winner Cristiano Ronaldo, who plays for Al Nassr, was not nominated for the first time since 2003. Bellingham, who joined Real from Borussia Dortmund this summer, is one of 10 nominees for the Best Young Player award, the Copa Trophy. New Manchester United striker Rasmus Højlund is also nominated. Arsenal and England's Aaron Ramsdale is one of 4 Premier League goalkeepers on the 10-man shortlist for the Yashin Trophy, for the world's best keeper. Onana, Manchester City's Ederson and Aston Villa's Martinez, a World Cup winner with Argentina, are the others. Ballon d'Or nominees: Josko Gvardiol, Manchester City, Croatia; Jamal Musiala, Bayern Munich, Germany; Andre Onana, Manchester United, Cameroon; Karim Benzema, Al Ittihad, France; Mohamed Salah, Liverpool, Egypt; Bukayo Saka, Arsenal, England; Kevin De Bruyne, Manchester City, Belgium; Jude Bellingham, Real Madrid, England; Randall Kolo Muani, Paris Saint-Germain, France; Bernardo Silva, Manchester City, Portugal; Kvicha Kvaratskhelia, Napoli, Georgia; Nicolo Barella, Inter Milan, Italy; Emiliano Martinez, Aston Villa, Argentina; Ruben Dias, Manchester City, Portugal; Erling Haaland, Manchester City, Norway; Martin Odegaard, Arsenal, Norway; Ilkay Gundogan, Barcelona, Germany; Yassine Bounou, Al Hilal, Morocco; Julian Alvarez, Manchester City, Argentina; Vinicius Jr., Real Madrid, Brazil; Rodri, Manchester City, Spain; Antoine Griezmann, Atletico Madrid, France; Lionel Messi, Inter Miami, Argentina; Lautaro Martinez, Inter Milan, Argentina; Robert Lewandowski, Barcelona, Poland; Kim Min-jae, Bayern Munich, South Korea; Luka Modric, Real Madrid, Croatia; Kylian Mbappé, Paris Saint-Germain, France; Harry Kane, Bayern Munich, England; Victor Osimhen, Napoli, Nigeria. Rugby World Cup begins with a uniquely close clutch of contenders. The tipsters are safe for now. Artificial intelligence may make us all redundant in the end, but asked this week who was going to win the Rugby World Cup, it sat on the firewall. Considering form, history and the rest, Opta's supercomputer simulated the tournament 10 million times. Yet, still it was unable to meaningfully split a 4-strong clutch of contenders. Ireland, reigning Grand Slam champions, historic Kiwi conquerors, were spat out as marginal favourites, with a 21.7% likelihood of lifting the William Webb Ellis Trophy on October 28. Hosts France, humming with belief and a sense of destiny, were on 21.4%. Defending champions South Africa and perennial powerhouses New Zealand followed close behind on 20.5% and 20.2% respectively. They are a formidable quartet. Never before has a World Cup teetered so tantalizingly. As the megabytes expended proved, you can make a compelling case for all and absolutely no guarantees about what follows. Ireland have cohesion and cunning, backed by Andy Farrell's doorstop of a playbook, as thick, intricately plotted and full of deception as a Dickens novel. Johnny Sexton, their 38-year-old totem, is dancing for the last time, with his rugby career ending whenever Ireland's campaign does. Backed by Dan Sheehan, Hugo Keenan, Caelan Doris, Mac Hansen, Gary Ringrose and World Player of the Year Josh van der Flier, it is undoubtedly his best, as well as final, chance of glory. Ireland centre Bundy Aki celebrates Ireland's Grand Slam win over England in March 2023. Ireland centre Bundy Aki celebrates Ireland's Grand Slam ceiling win over England in March. There is no obvious weakness beyond a lack of experience at the business end of this tournament. Ireland, infamously, have never made it beyond the quarter-finals in 9 previous campaigns. France have been deprived of fly-half Romain Tamac, who ruptured his anterior cruciate ligament last month. But Matthew Jalibert, his replacement, has a similar buccaneering streak and the services of his captain and world's best scrum half Antoine Dupont close at hand. A silky backline is matched by a steely pack, who marry piano lifter heft with the hands of concert-grade ivory tinklers. South Africa have added another dimension to their crash and bash stereotype, with the playmaking skills of Manie Libbok and Damian Willems unleashing Kurt Learens and Cheslin Colby more regularly. A win over New Zealand at Twickenham in their final warm-up match last week was an ominous statement of their intent to retain what is theirs. And, that defeat apart, New Zealand, for once neither champions nor leading favourites, are coming to the boil nicely. They trumped the rest of the Southern Hemisphere in this year's Rugby Championship, and in wings will Jordan and Mark Telia have electrifying threat out wide. So, any one of four? Wake us up come the semi-finals? Perhaps, if not for a draw as misshapen as a rugby ball itself. For not entirely clear logistical reasons, the pools were pulled in December 2020, nearly 3 years before the tournament's start. As if that wasn't enough, the basis for the draw's seedings was even older, drawn from January 2020's world rankings. Back then, England and Wales were safely ensconced in the world's top 4. Ireland were 5th. France were 7th. It has skewed the show. There are 2 routes to the top of the world game. One wild with peril, the other mild with mediocrity. Scotland's team is perhaps the finest in a generation. Their back row depth is such that Hamish Watson, a British and Irish Lion against South Africa 2 years ago, may well be on the bench. But pitched into a pool with Ireland and South Africa, their hopes of a decent run have been badly compromised. By contrast, England, for whom expectations have been chilled by 3 defeats in 4 warm-up games after a third successive deflating Six Nations, can afford to lose their opener to Argentina, a very real possibility given the Pumas' success at Twickenham last year, and still qualify. Wales are attempting to bridge the gap between a generation of golden oldies and some promising youngsters with Jack Morgan and Dewey Lake the pick of the new crop as co-captains. If they can see off a talented Fiji side and an Eddie Jones-led Australia that has ditched some of their own established names in search of consistency, top spot in Pool C is there for them. However results go on this safer side of the draw, one of Argentina, England, Wales, Australia, or perhaps Fiji will be 80 minutes from the final. A left-field candidate for the title is guaranteed on the penultimate weekend. As ever, there are fascinating subplots aplenty. Back in July 2022, Chile thrillingly conquered the United States 52-51 in a 2-legged qualification playoff to secure a debut appearance at the tournament. Portugal players celebrate their win over the United States. Portugal's playoff win over the United States means they return to the tournament for the first time in 16 years. 4 months later, Portugal scrum half Samuel Marques landed a last-gasp penalty to deny the U.S. once again and return his nation to the tournament for the first time since 2007. The celebrations after those upsets, like those that accompanied Uruguay's win over Fiji at Japan 2019 or Japan overturning South Africa in Brighton 4 years earlier, show the tournament's capacity to shock as well as awe. This edition will also be filled with intrigue over a Tonga side studded with former All Blacks, an enterprising Japan team attempting to build on a home World Cup and first quarter-final appearance, and whether Georgia can realize their best chance of making the last 8. There are and will be problems. The club game is stretched close to breaking point in England and Wales, 2 of its heartlands. Rugby Union's American push, with the United States hosting the World Cup in 2031, has stalled. In Australia, the stage for the 2027 tournament, the sport has to fight ever harder for prominence. On the pitch, the clampdown on tackle height and the resulting blizzard of cards will affect matches. The breakdown laws are difficult for even a seasoned fan to define and understand. Reducing the risk of repeated head injuries, which is behind both, is an existential challenge the sport can't afford to fail. But, on Friday evening, there will be a sweet spot. Under the Parisian lights, in front of Stade de France's 80,000 millions around the world, somewhere between the last notes of La Marseillaise and the first utterings of the haka, as 80 minutes and 7 weeks lie before us. For a moment everything will be right in the world and the World Cup. Liga F strike, Spain's top-tier women footballers to walk out over pay-in conditions. Liga F strike, Spain's top-tier women footballers to walk out over pay-in conditions. Salif Keita, how Mali's Black Panther became a pioneering icon. There are very few footballers so well respected that their club redesigns its logo to incorporate the player's nickname, but that is precisely what happened to Mali's Salif Keita in 1968. Just a year after joining Saint-Étienne, Keita, who died on Saturday aged 76, was celebrating not only a French League and Cup double but also seeing his nickname, the Black Panther, adorn the club's new logo. It represented quite a turnaround for a man who famously had to make his way from a Paris airport to Saint-Étienne in a taxi despite having no money after no one from the club was in the French capital to greet a 20-year-old arriving in Europe for the first time. From such humble beginnings, which mirrored his own upbringing back home, Keita rose to become not only the first African footballer of the year, in 1970, but also a pioneer for the continental talent that has since flooded Europe. When I talk about Salif, it's very sad, but I'm also very proud because he was an amazing guy, former Liverpool and Juventus midfielder Momo Sissoko, Keita's nephew, told BBC Sport Africa. It's a bad moment for everyone, as we lost one of the good guys, someone who achieved a lot for Mali and for all generations in Africa. To lose him is very sad for everyone, not just in Mali, but also in Africa. The death of Africa's first superstar footballer, despite playing in an era when television coverage was minimal in contrast to today, has prompted a range of tributes, with Didier Drogba calling him one of the greatest legends of African football. Meanwhile, Saint-Étienne deferentially wrote, "The Black Panther is gone, taking a piece of our club with him." In light of his starring role for Les Verts, with whom he won 8 trophies in 5 years, it was a fitting tribute for a forward who lit up French football with his sublime skill and immeasurable talent. Saint-Étienne banner on X, formerly known as Twitter. Saint-Étienne changed their banner on X, formerly known as Twitter, after the death of Keita, a club ambassador. On a par with Best, Pelé and Maradona. Keita's career began in his home city, where he shone so brightly for Real Bamako and Stade Malien that he caught the eye of a Saint-Étienne supporter in the country. Les Verts fan Charles Dagger was working at the Lebanese embassy in Mali, from where he repeatedly wrote to Saint-Étienne imploring them to not only give Keita a trial, but also keep any such plan secret. Given that Mali was unlikely to want to lose a man who had taken both his clubs to the final of what is today's African Champions League, Keita was effectively smuggled out of the country, bundled in the boot of a car. He eventually reached Liberia, where he was mugged of all his possessions, save for the all-important flight ticket sent by Saint-Étienne. Upon arrival, the letter of introduction sent by the club persuaded a local taxi driver to believe the young African and take him over 500 kilometers to Saint-Étienne, where an official paid a fare that would total nearly $1,400, £1,100, today. It was arguably the best money the club has ever spent. In his 5 years, he won 3 league titles, 2 French Cups and his African award, scoring 140 goals in 185 games along the way. Coupled with his efficiency in front of goal, his silky style of play entranced a nation. In the late 60s and early 70s, he was together with Marseille duo Josip Skobler and Roger Magnussen, the greatest icon of his age in French football, said long-standing French football journalist Philippe Auclair. He was the black guy who every little white boy, including me, pretended to be in the schoolyard, the magical dribbler, the impossibly elegant winger who made and scored wonder goals. He was a dream of the player, and that dream was ours. To me, in terms of mystique, he was on a par with George Best, Pelé and Diego Maradona, someone brought from another dimension where football could be poetry. I know this sounds over the top, but that's how it felt then, and still feels now. Saint Etienne's former club logo and late Malian footballer Salif Keita. Saint Etienne's club logo featured a black panther in honor of Keita from 1968 to 78 and from 1988 to 1993. Despite his aura, a row with Saint Etienne chairman Roger Rocher prompted Keita to join Marseille in 1972, lasting just a year before the club's attempts to persuade him to obtain French nationality and so abandon Mali, with whom he had lost that year's Africa Cup of Nations final, resulted in a move to Valencia. His arrival prompted a local paper to scandalously proclaim Valencia goes after Germans and comes back with a black man, but the first African player in the Spanish club's history put such attitudes to one side to become revered. When I talked with Valencia fans, all of them said to me, "Your uncle was an amazing player and an amazing person," said Sissoko, who played for the club early in his career. He felt very good about his spell at Valencia, often talked about it and had a lot of memories from his time there. No titles followed in his 3 seasons there, despite the accolades, and after another 3-year spell with Sporting Lisbon, where he won the Portuguese Cup, Keita wound down his career with Boston's New England T-Men, eventually retiring in 1980. During his time in the United States, he developed a good friendship with Pelé, who had also closed out his career in the North American Soccer League, NASL, 2 years earlier. "When two legends are together, they have a lot to talk about," said Sissoko. He'd talked to me about Pelé, saying he was a good guy and the connection was easy as they both came from poor families. They had a very good relationship. Unforgettable African pioneer. Late Malian footballer Salif Keita. Keita founded Mali's first football academy in his own name in the 1990s, with the academy now a club. Friend of superstars and an icon himself, Keita is remembered as a trailblazing pioneer by many of the African footballers who followed him to Europe, even if the exodus properly began during the 1990s, long after he had retired. When we talk about African football history, Keita's name will stand out forever, Nigeria's African champion Emmanuel Amunique told BBC Sport Africa. "It's very unfortunate we've lost a legend who inspired most of us." Like Keita, Amunique would play for Sporting Lisbon, before joining Barcelona and scoring the Olympic gold-winning goal in 1996, a year when FIFA awarded Keita its highest honor, the Order of Merit. By then, the Malian had founded a football academy which his nephew, Seydou Keita, who would also play for Valencia before winning 14 trophies with Barcelona, passed through, as did former Real Madrid midfielder Mahamadou Diarra. After a brief spell working for the Mali government, Keita ran his nation's football federation for 4 years, 2005 to 2009, but was most internationally celebrated when a film loosely based on his life, Le Ballon d'Or, in which he appeared, came out in 1994. The film tells the story of a young boy in West Africa whose footballing dreams soar from several fortunate encounters, one of which comes when his legs are sprinkled with magic, which could of course describe Keita's. For a guy from Mali who came from nothing to do what he did, and when he did it, in Europe was amazing, added Sissoko. His pioneering role makes me very proud because he was not only my relative but a Malian who showed everyone that when you want something in life, you fight for this and then you can be a superstar.